So over these last lectures, I promised that I would show you some more stuff that you can do with npm packages and npm scripts, right? Like automatically adding prefixes to some properties or compressing code. And so that's what we're going to do in this lecture. We are going to build something developers call a build process. And what is a build process? Well, it's basically just a sequence of tasks that we perform automatically after we finish developing a product or a certain feature of a product. And the result of the build process are one or more final files, which are then ready for production, which means basically ready to be deployed to a web server. So what you see here is the very simple build process that we're going to implement in a second. We just start with our main Sass file and then of course compile it to a CSS file, as we've been doing all this time. Then we want to merge the content of the CSS file with the CSS in the icon font file, so that we can go from including 2 CSS files in our page to only 1, which is a lot better. And that process is called concatenation. Then from there, we want to automatically add prefixes to our code, right? And so that's the next step in the build process. And then finally, the last step is to compress the entire code we have at this stage. And that's it. Just 4 simple steps, nothing all too complicated. So let's now create this build process with npm scripts. Alright, and we do that right here in the package.json file. Now the first thing that I want to do is to actually change the name of this script that we already have, which is called compiled Sass, and I want to change it to watch Sass, because next I want to add a script which will compile the Sass but without watching it, okay? So it's actually pretty much the same as this. We have to add a comma here if you want to add a new one. Okay, and this one I want to call compile. But as I said, without the watch part. Okay, and actually I want to compile it to another file. So we go from main, of course, which is our main Sass file, and I want to call it style.comp.css. Okay, so comp stands for compiled. Now right now we still have our code running in here, so let's actually close these two. So terminate, add a new tab, and then close this one. Okay, so if we now run our compile Sass script, we should actually end up with the same code as we had before, right? The only difference is that it puts that into a new file and that it's not going to watch for changes, okay? So let's just test that out. npm run compile Sass. And all right, so you saw that it finished here now, and it created a new file here as well. So style.comp.css. All right, and I'm doing that here in a different script or a different task, because these here are actually called tasks, okay? So I'm doing this in a different task because then later I want to combine all of these tasks for our build process, and then that one should of course not be watching for changes, okay? And so we want one that watches the changes, which is this one, and then we want one that we can use at the end of our project when we run the build process. So the next step is to concatenate our existing CSS files, right? So concat CSS, and of course these names that I'm using here don't have to be these exact names. So you can just call it concat or concatenation or whatever you want. I just like to use this format where we first describe what we do and then we say to what type of code it is applied. And so this case, concat. Now, how do we concatenate multiple CSS files? Well, once again, there is an npm package for that, and it's called just concat. So let's install it. So npm install concat, and then remember, we're going to save it to dev, so as a dev dependency, so that it's added to our package.json file. And so that's it. Now, how do we actually use this? Well, in case that you don't know, for example, you can usually just Google like npm concat, and usually the first result is the one that you're looking for, which will take you to npmjs.com. And so here, each npm package has its own page where you can look up how it's actually used. You can see the stats, so how many people download it. You can check out the source code on GitHub and all of that stuff. So down here you have an example. And so this here is how you use the concat package in the terminal. Okay, you could also use it from Node.js directly like this, but we're interested in the command line basically. So let's just copy this in order to make it easier for us. And then we can paste it here. So O here stands for output. And so here we can put the name of the output file that we want. And we want it to be in the CSS folder and called style.concat.css. And the input files are, of course, not these ones. This is just for example. So our input files are CSS icon font.css, right? And actually it's here dash, not point. So it's the icon font and then the style.comp.css. So the result of the first step, right? So CSS style.comp.css. Okay, so again, let me separate this here. Again, this is our first step where we compile our Sass file to our compiled CSS file. Then the next step is to concatenate these two files that we have, the icon font and the style from the first step, so this one here, into a new file which is called style.concat.css. Okay, and so for this concatenation, we installed a new npm package and looked up how we can actually use it. All right, so let's now test the step out. And again, in the end, we will have one global task which runs all of these at the same time. So we're not going to do them one by one in the real world. This is just for testing purposes, just to see if each of the step is actually working. So let's now try out concat CSS. So npm run concat CSS. And you see, it added a new file here. So let's take a look. And all right, so we have the content of the icon font file here, right? So all of this stuff. And then down here somewhere, yeah, so down here starts our own code, the code that we wrote. Great, so that worked. So we have now all of the CSS code in one single file, which is a lot better because like this, we only need one HTTP request instead of two when we had two files, right? Okay, next step is the prefix. So prefix CSS. And so we need yet another npm package. And this one is called npm install auto prefixer. And of course, save it as a dev dependency. So auto prefixer, yeah, I think that's right. Now, in order for the auto prefixer to work, we actually need to install another package, which is called post CSS. So npm install post CSS and then CLI, which means command line interface. So the name of this package is post CSS-CLI, and then of course save dev once more. Okay, and we need this one here because the auto prefixer is actually part of this post CSS plugin or package. Okay, so let's just wait until this installs. And so here we go. And so now the command here is actually post CSS, and then we say use auto prefixer. Okay, and so this one is a bit more complicated, and so I'm going to just show it to you instead of Googling how it works. So post CSS is the package that we use, and then we use the use option here with auto prefixer in order to actually make the auto prefix work. So next, the B option, which basically stands for browsers, and here we can specify which browsers we want to target. And the easiest options is to just say like the last X browsers. So for example, the last 5 browsers or versions actually, or whatever. And so with this here, it will target the last 5 versions of all the major browsers. And this data actually comes from the caniuse.com website that I showed you before. So it's always super up to date here. Now I like to use 10 versions here, then we can be really sure that it's going to add all the prefixes that we need, okay? So next is the input file, and that's the one from the step before. So style.concat.css, and then we specify the output parameter, so -o, and then the output that we want. So css style.prefix.css. And here I forgot the CSS part. Okay, and so now it's going to go in the CSS folder, grab the file that we outputted before, so this one here, and then write the output to the style.prefix.css file. So let's test that one out as well. So npm run prefix CSS. And all right, let's close this one here. And so style.prefix. Let's actually see how many lines this file has. Whoa, what's all of this here? Well, maybe we don't have to take a look at the number of lines. I just wanted to check out if the file is now larger than before. But we can actually see that it's added here a lot of prefixes. So like this WebKit here on all the transform properties. Okay, so you see that all of these transforms here now have the WebKit prefix. Then you will probably see, let's go up here to the animations. Here we also have it on the box shadow, the WebKit prefix. So it added these on a bunch of things. I just wanted to see the animations, but they are probably a bit more up. Here we go. So in the animations, it also should have added, yeah, here it did. So WebKit in the beginning of the add rule, okay? And so, yeah, we see that this actually worked quite well, right? Now all of this can look a bit scary, but that's not really a problem, right? Because you just have to write this once and then you can keep using it in the future. Okay, and so we actually already arrived at our last step. So compress CSS. And for this one, we actually don't need to install a new package because our node Sass package here can actually do that job. Okay? And it's very simple. We just have to write node Sass, then the input file, which is this one here. So the output from the step before, and then the output file. And I'm going to call this one simply style.css. So that will be our final file. We could also call it style.min like this, and you will usually see it as this, but I don't want to do that for one simple reason. It's because if I do that, then I would have to change in the HTML, the href here as well, right? And so I would have a different one for the development phase and then a different one for the production code. And I don't want that. Well, actually what I can do here right now is to comment out this part of the code because we don't need that anymore, right? Because it's now already included in our style.css file. Now, in order for this to work, we actually have to add an option here to this command, which is called output style and then compressed. Okay, and so basically with this option here, setting the output style to compressed, it will simply compress the code. There's nothing to compile from Sass to CSS because the input is already in CSS, but that's not a problem. All it's going to do here is to simply compress our code. Okay, so of course let's test that one out as well. So npm run compress CSS, and so style.css. Whoa, so that's our final code now. This is how it looks, and it's just one line of code, a huge line of code with all the code in there. So basically without all of the white space that we included and without all the comments also, of course. Let's actually compare the sizes of these, okay? Because I'm really curious now. So all the CSS files that we created here. So the input was the prefix one, right? And it had 109K. And then the compressed one, which is this style CSS, has only 33. So that's actually a big difference. So like 76K, okay? So with that very simple step, we just reduced our page load by almost 80 kilobyte, right? So that's great. Now, as I promised, I would in the end write a task that will run all of these four here at the same time. So compiling, concatenation, prefixing, and compressing. And I'm going to call that one build CSS. And so this one is going to build our CSS, which is going to be ready for production. And so how do we do that? Well, the best option in order for it to work on all platforms, so on Mac and Windows and Linux all at the same time, is to use once again an npm package. And this one is called npm run all. And so the name here actually says all. So we just call this package, so npm run all, and then all we have to do is to put the name of the tasks in there. So compile, concat, prefix, and compress. All right, now let's actually delete all of these files here. Okay. Except the icon font, of course, because that one we have to keep. And so let's now test this out. So npm run build CSS. All right. So you saw that it ran all of our tasks here one by one. And now it's finished. And it created all of these files here, meaning that our build process is actually working. Fantastic. That's a great job, really. That's really cool. But there's actually more that I want to show you. I want to show you another use case of this npm run all. Okay? So this is here our build process, so our build workflow. Now what we also want is basically a development workflow. And we already set that up before, right? So basically as we develop, we are running this watch CSS process here, and at the same time we're running the live server process, right? So that process that makes it so that each time that we save a file, it automatically reloads the browser, right? But remember that we had to run both of these in a different command line. And so that's not really handy, right? We can do better than that. So let us first add another task called dev server. And this is just for live server. So basically dev server will be the same as the live server. But here in the step that I'm going to show you next, I cannot directly call live server. And so I have to create this task here, which I can then call. Because what I'm going to do now is a task called start. And that's a very common name that developers use for a development process. Okay. So I'm going to call start and I want to run npm run all. Watch CSS and dev server. And actually let's put the dev server here before. All right. Now in order to make this work, so basically that they run at the same time, I have to specify another argument, another option. And that one is simply called parallel. Okay. And that's because I want these two to run at the exact same time. While down here, I want them to run in a sequence. So first this one, then this one, then this one, then this one. And so that is different. Okay. So here they have to run both at the same time. Okay. And so if we now do npm run start, then it gives me this error here. Okay. But I see why that is. And it's because here it's not CSS, but it's called watch SAS, right? So watch SAS here, and then of course watch SAS over there as well. So now it should run. Clear. Yeah, all right, so here we go. So we can close the previous one that we had. And so you see, if you take a look at our console now, that it's working the node says with the watch and the live server here, right? And so with one command, we basically started our development workflow. So just to test things out, let's change something. For example, let's set it here to something really huge. All right, so that's not what we want, of course, but what this means is that basically it's working, right? So it's watching our SAS file and it's running our live web server. So that is absolutely great. Now by doing that, of course, it overrode the style.css file that we outputted before, right? Because now it's created a new one. And so during development, this one here cannot be commented out because otherwise we will not be able to access the icon font, right? So you can only put this comment here. So you can only take out this entire code. So basically when you're ready to deploy it to a live web server. Okay, but for now I'm going to leave it like this and come back to my package.json file. But actually I think we're already done here. So we now have our development process here nicely on the top, and then our build process in here. And it works for this project, and it can work the exact same way on all your next projects. So all you have to do is to then come back here and copy this part here of the script, copy these dev dependencies, and then you're good to go. So I hope that you found this useful, because there's really a huge value in automating all this kind of stuff. And that's what all real developers actually do in the real world. And so that's why I wanted to show you this, because I think it's really important for you. So we're almost ready with our project. There's only one lecture left to finish up our Nators project. And so don't wait and come check that one out right now.